Hello, mentors. It is confession season, and for myself, confession season is intense. It's a whirlwind. I could listen up to 10 confessions. That's close to 50 hours or more of just hearing people's stories, and that seems a lot and intense, and it is, but it's also one of the most beautiful and sacred things that the Lord invites us into as Regen leaders. And because you're listening to this, you have been invited into someone's sacred telling of their story as well. And so I hope that this marks you. I hope it changes you. I hope that you gain a better understanding of what confession is, why we do it, why is it so important to do it within community. And to kick that off, I want to read to you, it's just a couple sentences, but this is like the best understanding of why we do confession, but why we do regeneration in community. Why do we do it? Why can't you just heal in isolation? It's also something that I would push back of why it is necessary to add to counseling, that if a participant has been doing years of counseling, there is benefit to adding people into that journey and not doing it just alone. And this is why. God transforms us using His Word, His Spirit, and His people. Confessing sin to one another heals relationships, moves us to pray for each other, humbles our prideful nature, builds authentic Christ-centered community, and shares the burden of sin. It convicts others of sin, and it declares God's grace. Confession to others is essential for healing and restoration. That was from day 5 of our work. There is so much rich material in step 5 homework, and so one of the things that we've asked participants to do is to wait until they've done all the reading of step 5. Step 5's reading really encourages them to do a few things. One, it teaches them why confession to someone else is important, because in our sin, in our own patterns of just isolation, of being scared to be vulnerable, the hardest thing to then enter into is to deep, authentic relationships. Well, doing confession with others really pushes back on that. The other part of confession that is just so important is it teaches us really that first we confess to the Lord and it restores this relationship. Then as we speak it out loud, the power that Satan has held over an individual, that their story is too much, that no one would love them if they really knew them, all of a sudden, all of that fear, all of that intimidation that's inside of you, it just is collapsed under the weight of the truth of what God says in His Word. And so we want them to do the work. The work also teaches them how to grieve and to lament their story. I can't tell you how many, even just this year, have just confessed that they don't feel worthy to cry over their story, that their story is so bad, it's so ugly, but so are other people's, and they don't feel valuable and worthy of having anyone else have compassion or empathy on them in their telling of their story. And so we want them to learn that they are valuable, that the Lord has grieved over their story, and He wants to invite them into that process. The other part is that step 5 really teaches them how to go back to their inventory work, how to dig out nuggets of truth, how to understand their patterns, how to understand their idolatry, how to understand their pride. And really the only way they can do that is just doing the heavy lifting of the work. And so that's why we've asked them to wait until after the 18th to then schedule. I would also encourage you, when they reach out to you, ask them, hey, we were told that you guys were supposed to finish step 5. Did you finish it in its entirety? And so that's a way that you can really help us hold them accountable, so that we know that everyone's getting that opportunity to understand that this is a biblical pattern and a rhythm that God really wants to instill even within the church. we see from the very beginning in Genesis that God goes to the sinners. He goes to Adam and Eve. He calls them out and says, why are you hiding? Who told you these things? And what God's really after is just the truth. He's after Adam and Eve being able to truth tell back to him what happened. And so when you think of confession, I really want you to put side by side to confession is truth telling. We want participants to begin to tell the truth about their story, to tell the truth about the abuse that they suffered, to tell the truth about the resentments that have built up in their hearts year after year after year, to confess and to say that this fear has kept me deathly afraid to ever enter into community, to ever enter into serving, to ever just be free with the Lord. And so really the only way that the next steps even can begin to take shape and can even begin to work is if a participant is willing to tell the truth. And so that's what we're after. That's what they're inviting you in to listen. We have asked for a mentor and a leader to sit in with a confession. This isn't mandatory. It's not what Watermark has in their books. It's what we found over the years to be, I think, the most fruitful, because the step leaders are going to also be the ones alongside you. We've talked about this being a team effort to move participants through to freedom and healing. But part of that is to have a full understanding of the scope of the damage of sin done to them and that they've done to others. And that helps us as we walk into step 6, repentance, and as we walk into step 8, forgiveness. And so that's kind of the background of why we have a mentor and a leader sit in. The other part is oftentimes they've invited mentors into this process, and you may be feeling a little inadequate and not knowing exactly what to expect because you've never gone through Region. Another benefit of having a leader in there is once you've gone through the full journey, you'll understand how these steps build on themselves. You'll understand that what we're listening for in inventory, we're going to use for the next 7 steps. And so you being partnered with a leader can really help teach you, hey, this is how it looks. And then you'll be more prepared in the years to come that we hope you'll continue mentoring for us. Another part of why it's beneficial is 2 ears are better than 1. I love listening to a person's story, and the Lord oftentimes just puts things on my heart, but it's really neat to then hear the mentor's perspective and to hear what they heard coming out of it as well. And so oftentimes we can maybe hear different things, or oftentimes we validate each other and go, yeah, I heard the same thing. And so what that kind of looks like as you come into confession, you'll meet either at the church or somewhere private, somewhere quiet where there's no interruptions, and it will be anywhere really from 2, I've had it up to 6 hours. And so it just kind of depends. You need to just set aside, I think I would average maybe more like 3 to 5 hours. And so have that set aside that you will be able to just sit and really focus on their story. We encourage you to bring a notepad and a pen. You maybe are going to feel a little like a counselor and they should be laying on a couch, but really the benefit is you're going to be doing active listening. So as a participant opens their book, if they started with the abuse section, they're going to start with harms to me. If they did the other just direction that's normal is they'll begin with resentments. And so whichever bucket you start with, we ask a participant to listen to it in its we ask mentors and leaders to listen to it in its entirety. And so the participant will just read it line for line, word for word, and they'll just work a situation across in their inventory book. And then when they're all done with resentments, then the mentor and leader will just kind of give them feedback. At this point, begin to think of it a little bit like a workshopping. You are listening as they're unfolding their story. You're listening for patterns. You're listening for words that they say over and over, or you're listening for people that they've left out. When we get done with a resentment buckets, oftentimes if a parent or a family of origin is left out in its entirety, I'll just kind of ask them like, hey, where was mom and dad in this? Why aren't they in any of your resentments? I'm a parent. I know that I have put resentments in my kids' hearts. And so we want to give them an honest place to be able to just confess those things. If they've left a spouse out, you may just say, okay, let's talk through, why is a spouse not in here? You can't be married and not have resentments. We are all sinners. We all have fallen short. We all make mistakes. And so what we want to do is really, after they get done confessing this bucket, what it does is just bring an enormous relief. This weight that they've been carrying is all of a sudden free, because they're no longer having to protect. They're no longer having to justify. They are able to just freely speak the things that have caused harm in them over these years. Another part that we like to do is just ask them gently at the end, especially after sexual inventory or harms to me, and just simply say, hey, did you include everything that you needed to? Is there anything else that you didn't feel free to put in there? Like, this is your opportunity. And for the rest of the steps, Regen is going to ask them, is there anything else you didn't include? Sometimes for people sharing abuse, sharing sexual sin that's really embarrassing for them, these are two very vulnerable spaces. And so when they've invited you into this, you want to honor that by being gentle and giving them a space to just confess everything. Just let it be done. And so that's what you get to do. One thing that kind of tags with that that's included on here is don't be surprised by sin. When we went through sexual inventory a few weeks ago, I put on the screen a list of just all the sexual sins. That includes incest, it includes bestiality, it includes adultery, it includes siblings, just all kinds of things that are extremely hard for someone to share, especially if it's their first time. And so what I would just encourage you is to just have a blank face. That when they get done sharing something that's extremely vulnerable, like, just stop in that moment, congratulate them, like, thank you for sharing. Thank you for entrusting me with that part of your story. Listen, there's no condemnation. There's no judgment on my heart. I don't have anything. I have no business standing with any kind of judgment towards you. Romans 8 says there is no condemnation now. And so that's what you get to stand under. Thank you for sharing. Let us just pray over you, and we'll just continue in this process. I kind of touched on listen for things not shared. If they do have a really intense abuse or trauma in the past, and then in resentments, none of those participants, no other family member, maybe parents that didn't do anything about it, if they're not included, just gently ask those questions like, hey, this was a really big moment in your life. Why isn't anyone else listed in that? And sometimes it's just they forget. Sometimes it's the fog of war of just writing it down. And sometimes it's honestly, they're just afraid to. They're just tired of that, and they haven't really looked past that part of their story. The next part that you're going to really begin listening to after you've listened to 6 different buckets is going to be, what are the patterns? What are the idols? Those are the things that we're going to use for the next 7 steps. And so what you're really going after, that's why this confession is just so rich, because it's not only a point where they get to just release all the things that have been building up over the years. They also get to have someone else hear that to speak into it, to give insight, and then we're going to begin to work on that in step 6. And so you're listening for patterns. Idols is sometimes a little bit more difficult. I think people just struggle with what does idolatry look like. And so what we want to help you to understand is there is nothing wrong. There's an idol sheet in their inventory book, and it lists all of these idols. Now, if you looked at some of them, like safety and security and a parent's approval, in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with those. We should desire to feel safe and secure. That is what I'm trying to give my children. I want them to feel that at home it's safe and secure. However, if a participant has been hurt, if there has been repeated hurt, if there's been abuse or trauma, what happens is what they value most is safety or security. What it turns like is into self-protection. And self-protection is really just, it's rebellion towards God. We never think of it that way. We would never say, I'm gonna rebel against God and I'm gonna protect my heart. But in essence, what they're doing is going all the way back to step 3, which was trust. And they're saying, you know what, because this safety was taken away from me, I no longer trust you as Lord that you can actually protect me. I'm gonna step in that space and I'm going to protect. And so you see how something that's good that God has asked for parents to do and to be active participants in their children's lives, when that gets disrupted and we step into that space to find safety and security in our own strength, it becomes something that we value more and believe that I can do it better than God can. And now that you see the tension, now you see that this thing that is good is now actually taking me away from the thing that I value most, and that's an intimate relationship with God. Well, I can't have intimacy with the Lord when I don't trust him. So step 2 and 3, believe and trust, were obviously at the beginning. And we really pushed participants and said, do not give us the church answer. We know the longing of your heart is to say, I trust God with everything. But think about Proverbs 3. Proverbs 3 says to trust in the Lord with all of our heart and lean not on our own understanding. That's in direct contradiction, right? Trust in the Lord, don't lean on myself. Well, when I step into control or I step into self-protection, I am leaning on my own understanding. And so this is why we're trying to draw these things out and raise kind of like an attention banner of like, hey, this is out of whack in your life. This is too much have you placed in security and safety that you can provide, and you've taken that away from the Lord. And so we're going to deal with that once again. We tried to deal with it in step 2 and 3, but oftentimes participants aren't ready to acknowledge, look, I have a trust issue. But once they get done doing inventory and they've written things out and they see their patterns, I can't tell you how many times at the end of confession that someone has said, I don't trust God at all. And I'm like, I know, and it's okay. That's what the rest of these steps are all about. But first we had to identify the wake of damage that is in your own heart. That for most people, we just don't take the time to deal with it. We are too busy. Our culture is telling us to go, go, go. Do more, be better, do all these things, have your kids in all the activities, you be involved in everything, and there's just no space to sit with this. That's again why we're asking them to finish step 5. Step 5 really takes a little bit more time than what they're used to giving, because they're asking you and asking the participant to go back into their inventory, sit with it, look at their responses, look at their idolatry, and really confess that before the Lord first, and then do it with their community. And so that's a little bit of what confession looks like. It's why we do it. It is a pivotal moment It is a sacred moment, and so we appreciate the time and effort that you have put into your participant. I want to shift gears for just a minute and just say, if your fall has been difficult with your participant, if it has been hard to get them to meet weekly, if it has been hard to just find that consistency and honesty in your time, I just want to encourage you to hold on. Oftentimes, until people work through inventory and get all of the garbage out of their heart, they're still in running mode. They're still in isolating mode. And so you're asking them to do something that is so counterintuitive to what they've been doing for years. Oftentimes, the spring can really be a time that becomes rejuvenated because they're no longer hiding. They've declared all these fears, all these control patterns, and now they're still in it and they want to start working forward. And so please keep meeting with them. Please keep pursuing them. For some people, when this is their first taste of doing any kind of heart work, it's overwhelming. It causes them to shut down. It causes them to be angry. It causes these crazy outbursts of emotions, and they're like, why am I doing this? I don't want to be more angry. And so what we're really asking you as mentors to be is just this steadfast person that pursues them weekly, that reaches out and says, hey, I'm praying for you. Hey, thanks for sharing what you did last week. I have been thinking about it. I'm praying for that specific issue as you keep working through your steps. Like, you really get to be this voice that teaches them that community is a good thing. Colossians 3 says to bear with one another. You're doing it. You are bearing with them, and you're also doing what we talked about. You're being authentic. You're sharing the burden. You're declaring God's grace. You're convicting them of sin. Really, part of your job as mentor is, as you begin to hear these patterns and idols, then in the future, when you see them going back to their flesh, we're going to talk about it in a few weeks. We call it left or right. And right means we're standing in the Spirit of God. We're acting as the Spirit comes on with all of those fruits. Going left is just going back into our old patterns, going back into our old coping strategies, because that's just easier. Part of what we're going to ask you to do in these next months is really call out sin. Call out those moments of like, hey, what I hear you saying is kind of what I heard you doing in the fall. What's going on? What's triggering you that's making you go back to self-protection, go back to isolation? And let's talk through that. And so just know, as mentors, like, your role is extremely valuable. I can't meet with 10 women weekly, and so I need you. And so we are so thankful for what you've committed. If this has been a rough, kind of rocky beginning in the fall, hang on, stick with them through confession, and then just have a real clear meeting the first time in January and just say, look, we weren't very consistent in the fall. Let's really try now, as you are trying to turn and go right. Use me, use my time, and let me help you make those patterns become a thing of the past, and now begin forging into new ruts and new ways that the Spirit is asking you to. So thank you very much. Look forward to just the next few months finishing off Regen with you. Have a good day.